We're excited to introduce the next session to kick off our afternoon. That session is entitled Solving for the Last Mile, the Next Evolution of Micromobility, and will feature Richard Chang. Richard is currently a Senior Manager at Enterprise Solutions, where he focuses on micromobility and asset tracking. Richard holds a Bachelor of Computing from Queen's University and is passionate about martial arts. I'd like to introduce Richard Chang.
Hello. Hey, Michael. Thanks for that warm welcome. I'd like to introduce some of the speakers that will be joining us today. As many of you know, micromobility and shared vehicles have been a really huge industry focus for Particle for the last several years. We've powered kind of large fleets of 50,000 plus electric vehicles across more than 100 cities. And so we're excited to have some of the leaders in this space joining us today. First up, our first panelist joins us all the way from Sydney, Australia, where it's quite early in the morning, and I see he's got coffee cup in hand. Mina is the co-founder and CEO of Bolt Bikes. Prior to founding Mina, was the general manager at the largest bike sharing company in China, Mobike, and after that leading the expansion of Deliveroo to be a market leader in food delivery in Australia. Mina, thanks so much for joining us today. And next up, we've got Melika Jahangiri, who is joining us from Los Angeles, California. Mel is the VP of Global Key Accounts and US Sales at Wunder Mobility. Mel has been working with mobility companies and OEMs. Throughout her background, she worked at Ford Motor Company, where she worked with a lot of cities and municipalities on ride-sharing strategies. Prior to that, she was on the founding team at Envoy Car Sharing Services. And Mel, thank you so much for joining as well. Our two panelists come from very different sides of the mobility space. I want to make sure that our kind of diverse online audience has a good understanding of these two perspectives. So Mina, we'll start with you. Maybe could you explain a little bit of the concept behind Bolt Bikes and a little bit of how your unique background led to this opportunity in the market?
Yeah, sure. So Bolt Bikes was born as a result of my experiences as a general manager at Deliveroo. And so what Deliveroo does, it's like the European and Australian equivalent of DoorDash and Uber Eats and Postmates and Grubhub in the States. It does food delivery in those markets. And over there, it quickly became apparent to me that the regular modes of vehicle transportation were not ideally set up for last mile deliveries. And that really electric bikes were the future for that. And so Bolt was born to enable food delivery to happen more quickly. And also we offered it in a service model that suited the end user. So, as we know, gig workers are the guys who power a lot of the delivery economy, obviously, a lot of the ride sharing economy. And for them, a huge number, very transient workers are often students, are often doing it between jobs. And the challenge was that, if you're doing food delivery, it's because you don't even have a car in the first place all the time. Otherwise, you're probably doing Uber. And so what we introduced was a subscription model where it was super flexible, week to week, and all-in cost, which would cover them for including their servicing and their maintenance and call outs for us to fix their bikes. And it's been, super popular. And actually, in our partnerships with food delivery companies that we've introduced, our couriers have kind of come out to be amongst the most reliable, the highest rated, and actually the fastest delivery people in their fleets.
That's great. And I really like Bolt Bikes as a unique take on the market. Most people see micromobility and they see all of the scooters lining the streets. They see docked bikes, they see dockless bikes, they see emerging e-bikes. But you guys are responsible for the food that's being delivered to all folks that are sheltering in place. So I think whether or not a lot of our audience members know it, they may have received food from somebody using one of your vehicles. So that's great. And Mel, I see you've joined us. Apologies for the technical difficulties, but I'm glad you're here with us now from California. We're just doing a little bit of introductions for the audience so that they understand the side of the micromobility space that you're coming from. Could you tell us a little bit about Wunder Mobility and some of the core focus areas that you guys have?
Yeah, so I'm Melika. I go by Mel as well, so you might hear that in this conversation, and you guys are welcome to call me Mel. I joined Wunder Mobility back in October, but I am familiar with using them when I was at Ford and looking at their software quite a few times when I've worked as an operator. So what Wunder Mobility is it's a company that essentially allows anyone who wants to create any kind of shared mobility service to be able to create something very quickly and use our white label service to create a kick scooter company, a moped company, something similar to what Mina does with the e-bike company, delivery, ride hailing, car sharing, carpooling, you name it, we probably have it. Essentially, you can go and have an idea, concept to delivery of a product within 8 weeks. And we also have ways that we can customize our tools for our customers who need something a little bit more unique. So we can either do some kind of microservices to an existing platform that you may have built internally, or build something from scratch for you on top of ours, or give you something that you can take right off the shelf and create.
No, that's great. Thanks for the background. And one of the things that has always struck me about Wunder is the diverse array of vehicles that you guys support, starting with cars, but expanding to all of the scooters, e-bikes, regular bikes, courier bikes, three-wheeled vehicles that we've seen. Being able to be an adaptable software firm and cover all of these different vehicles and all the different use cases, I think is a real strength that you guys bring to the market.
Thanks.
Let's start off with the topic that's sort of top of mind for a lot of people right now. The mobility space has really been impacted by COVID. Ridership has went up, it went down, it's doing a lot of unpredictable things. Can you tell us a little bit, we'll start with you, Mel, how your firm has responded to this situation?
Yeah, so I think, of course, COVID is on everybody's mind. And I think originally when there was more studies around surface and getting around that, we saw some of the micromobility services be taken off the streets, or even car sharing be taken off the streets. And then over the course of time, we've realized that it's more of an essential business, and they're starting to bring it back to the forefront. So we're seeing micromobility come back. We're seeing in some capacity, like Revel is still operating in New York, or Felix is operating in Amsterdam. And we're seeing that people are not using buses and transit as much as they would typically because they don't feel safe. And so to be able to use micromobility or other kinds of services, they can mitigate their own risk by, sanitizing and doing all that kind of stuff. And so what we've realized very quickly for our customers is that their original use cases or their typical use cases are no longer viable in this market. And so we have to pivot very quickly. So some of the things that we've done is been able to create features within our product within a week to allow people to do more delivery services. So
wow.
If someone was doing ride hailing before, now they can actually pivot it to just doing delivery with that, or even with mopeds or e-bikes and things like that. So what Mina is doing is actually really interesting, and probably one of the most viable pieces of business right now in this market, where there's such a strong need for that, where there's a lot of workers that are coming out from other sources of lines of businesses that they need to supplement their income with delivery. And so a lot of our customers are pivoting their business now, and maybe even in the future around that. We also created like an icon in the app to quickly tell people if something, a vehicle has been disinfected or not, because a lot of it is also around peace of mind. And so we've heard from other operators, like they send out an email, like these are the disinfecting tactics we're doing to make our vehicle safe, but there's no way to really know when was the last time this was done. And so like having an icon, for example, makes a huge difference on peace of mind. And so we've seen kind of an increase of utilization happening more now. And I was reading a study around City Bike that they have 67% more utilization this March versus last March. We also were seeing up to 70% utilization on some of our moped share in some of the markets that they were being used before they got suspended. So people prefer to use these services over getting into an Uber or Lyft or a bus or any kind of metro at this moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that sort of tagging as an essential service is hopefully one of the lasting impacts. Zach in his keynote talked about some of the artifacts of this kind of COVID time that will persist after things return to normal. And I think people are increasingly seeing the critical role that shared mobility vehicles play. And I think we can look to some of the areas of China that have started to open up, and we see that there's still a hesitance to use public transit, but things like bike sharing have really been exploding as those cities have opened up again.
Yeah. And even some of the scooter share companies are creating like disinfecting handles, like ones that can disinfect constantly. So we're just seeing these trends happening more and more often, and probably something that's going to be here to stay for quite some time.
Yeah, it makes sense. And we'll talk a little bit about it later on in the discussion, but I really like the idea that you guys are able to make changes in the back-end platform in a week or in 2 weeks' time to adapt to the changing market conditions. I think broadly, a lot of our IoT product creators across industries are realizing that, it's not a cloud platform that you build once, it's something that adapts over time. From a cloud standpoint, from a user standpoint, and from an IoT and hardware standpoint, these things are evolving. These are living products that need to keep current as regulation changes or as things happen globally that force us to adapt.
That's absolutely right. And I just want to touch on that on the IoT part, because that's super important. We are a hardware agnostic company, which means we actually have a team dedicated to go to China typically every other month. Right now they're not doing that, but they go and they source out and they find like what's new and what's happening and what's interesting. And, having like one IoT source is not it. And we really are careful about who we want as our IoT partner, just like we do with Particle, because they have to kind of work at the same level and speed of what we're doing. And their innovation has to match it, and their connectivity has to be at that 99.9% rating. So IoT, everything like has to move at the same speed as what we're doing. Otherwise, what we're doing will lag if the connectivity is not there.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say you guys have seen a lot of the different players in the market, and picking the wrong solution can have a lot of bad impacts for your business later on. So we've been equally as selective with our partners, and we're glad to continue working with you guys. Turning things over to Mina, food deliveries have never been more important. The first reaction that I think a lot of people have to the situation is, well, Bolt bikes your phones must be ringing off the hook. Is it more complicated than that?
It's been an absolutely wild ride. I think for us, coronavirus started back in January because of the supply chain impact. So,
yes.
very vigorously trying to understand what's happening on the ground in Taiwan and in China and in the rest of our supply chain. And we had, pretty close view on that. And we're getting, asked lots of questions about its impact on the supply side. And of course, by the time March rolled around, it very quickly emerged as a demand side problem as well, or question. And I guess we operate across the US, the UK, and Australia. So we've also seen, very different stories play out in each of those markets. We're fortunate that, being based in Australia, we've had it controlled very well. I think we've had no more than 80 deaths across the country. And I think yesterday, like 5 coronavirus cases discovered across the country. And so there's a sense of normality emerging or re-emerging, or at least comfort, and lack of panic and risk. And on the other hand, in the UK, obviously our business is closely linked to delivery. And you saw in the UK that a lot of the major the major chains of food companies, the restaurants themselves, like unilaterally shut down. So that's like your McDonald's, KFC, Nando's, and Wagamama are big chains in the UK. And so we did see actually a dip in delivery, which meant a dip in work, which meant a challenge over there. In the US and Australia, definitely food delivery is kind of seen a walloping rise. And I think for the first time in Uber's history, Uber Eats business is as big, if not bigger than its rides business.
Yes, I heard.
And then within all of that, the trends of delivery change. The movements. The delivery stopped being in the central business districts and moved out to the suburbs. They stopped being dinner time and started increasing at lunchtime with people working from home ordering their food. even I saw a stat from Uber in Australia that dinner times have moved earlier, up from, on average 8 p.m. to 6 p.m. because people don't have to travel, back home. And so even educating our customers to adjust to these, variations, we were getting signals, very early in the midst of the panic of, all the deliveries are gone, when, we knew from our conversations with the food delivery companies that deliveries are up. So there's that. And then even within that, in Australia, for instance, we saw a rush of returns from customers all of a sudden, and that we'd never seen.
Returns as in people handing in their bikes.
People returning the bikes, and
Right. Okay.
And we kind of had to get to the bottom of that and realize that in Australia, where they had like blocked international travel, a bunch of our customers are internationals, and they just decided they needed to get home before they got locked, in the country, and they decided to return the bikes. Now our customer demographic has changed in Australia, and it's much more, local Australian citizens who've been laid off from their jobs. And so, adjusting to all of these moving parts, over the course of 2 weeks, has been incredibly crazy. And then actually for the first time, our phones started going off the hook, of course, from restaurants directly wanting to lease bikes from us. And I think we've struck up a couple of great partnerships as a result of this, with the companies that do point of sale inside restaurants, and basically us hooking in with them so that restaurants can keep their waiters who were previously busy, previously working as waiters, instead of laying them off, having them do the deliveries themselves on their own vehicles, which we supply, and avoiding having to use Uber Eats or DoorDash and the like, who are charging commissions of 30% plus on the delivery. So we found ourselves all of a sudden leasing out fleets, basically, instead of into individual couriers, which has been what our model has been built on historically, actually directly out to restaurants.
That's great. That's great. Keeping with the theme of kind of lasting impacts of COVID, has the user base, not the user base, the delivery firms become more diverse? I know you mentioned Uber Eats and Deliveroo and all that, but are you seeing kind of traditional brick and mortar stores, independents, large companies getting into the space as well?
It's hard to know what will last and what won't. There's right now there's a big push back against Uber Eats and Deliveroo, and people are going to do it themselves. I think that as restaurants get busy again, they'll realize they don't want to deal with the hassle of of managing deliveries, and I think that people will move. Will be more focused on Uber Eats and Deliveroo, who are entirely outsourced, and because they can do it right now because they have lots of waiters who are out of work, and they can tell them go do this delivery. When their restaurants are pumping again and the waiters are busy and it's hard to hire a delivery person, I don't think they're going to want that headache. So I think that is a phase that will go away. There's a debate around, if we enter a world where people are poorer and there's less discretionary income, how much delivery will stay and how much will go. Is it a luxury? Or is it actually a behavior? If you compare us, in the Western world to China, delivery is, not as deeply penetrated across, lots of e-commerce segments. Are we just catching up? People have signed up to their Amazon account or their Uber Eats account or whatever it was, and are now going to keep on using that because it's just an easy behavior and it's relatively fundamental. Or people are going to be poorer and see food delivery as a luxury and overall, see that coming off. That remains to be seen. I think it's hard to know what the right answer is on that. And I guess I think what will stick around, I believe, is the diversification of delivery, between the big apps like the Uber Eats and the Deliveroos, getting into grocery delivery and pharmaceutical delivery and that sort of thing. I think this is a chance for them to diversify their businesses, and if the grocery delivery sticks around, which I don't think that will will fall away to pre-COVID levels, then they're going to want a piece of that pie. So it's still early days, to be talking about post-COVID, but watching brief, I guess.
For sure. I want to stick with you, Mina, for a second and talk a little bit about the vehicle that you guys are building and the IoT solution provided by Particle that's provided there. I think many of our online audience members are starting on that same journey. They're building a connected product for the first time. They're hiring skills in-house for the first time to manage the product development cycle and manufacturing. Could you tell us a little bit about that vehicle that you're building, and why nothing on the market fit the bill?
Yeah, I think our story is, maybe somewhat similar to the Birds and Limes in that, they started using, third-party vehicles to prove that a market existed, but, quickly realized that those vehicles were not fit for purpose, and the Segway 9bot scooters that were made for consumers really had a lot of issues. And so, our story has been similar in that, we started off using vehicles that we could find off the shelf, and we made certain adjustments to them, whether it was increasing the number of lights on the bikes so that they were more safe, because of course couriers, spend maybe 8 hours a day on the road, or having higher end brakes and puncture-proof tires, or large batteries, things like that. But ultimately, we still realized that no bike on the market was fit for purpose for our use case, and actually we could end up making a better and cheaper bike than what was out there. And so that was part of the logic to go down the route of building our own. And so, we found that that's, an important way for us to offer a differentiated product. We've been doing this for a couple of years, and we know what couriers need. And we, have scoured the market. If we didn't have to build it ourselves, we really would have rather not to. I think we're pretty proud of what's actually on the production line, as we speak, and first of our own bikes kind of shipping next week, which are, based on a year of development now, and we'll be looking forward to testing how they perform in our markets.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when you were first telling me about this use case, 8 hours riding a day, hauling a significant amount of weight with you in some cases is definitely not something that you could put a Segway scooter through. The durability just wouldn't be there. The comfort wouldn't be there. The motor's probably not strong enough. So it made sense once I heard more about the challenges of one of these delivery workers. Now, Particle is a piece of this new bike, of course, and can you tell us a little bit about the data that you want to get out of these bikes, and kind of where you see it playing an important part of your business today and in the future?
Yeah, I think that, another challenge with a lot of the bikes that we've been using out there is, I think there's been a lot of development on the scooter, in the scooter world, and 1,001 companies jumped in and jumped on the scooter bandwagon and were trying to sell to Bird and Lime and all the other copycats that were out there. And a lot of rapid development on that front. I think with our mode that we focused on, electric bikes, there wasn't the same development, and still the majority of the bikes that are in our fleet are dumb bikes. They're not smart. They're not connected. And I did work at Mobike before working at Bolt and setting this up. And what we every single one of the 7 million plus bikes that we had out on the streets were connected bikes that had a smart lock that was had IoT. Basically, it had the GPS, it had the accelerometer, it had the Bluetooth, it had the modem, and it had the ability to remotely lock the bikes. And you can't really run a fleet. No one runs a fleet of trucks or any other kind of even basic assets without having IoT on them these days. And so it was clear to us that we needed to put that into our bikes in order to manage theft and loss and track our vehicles, and from a really fundamental fleet management perspective, a basic of managing that fleet. But again, we had the same issue that if you bought something off the shelf, it couldn't integrate well into your vehicle. You couldn't collect the data that you wanted to collect. It would be easy to tamper with, and so again, we were sort of forced down the route of building our own.
Yeah, and the other part that I think folks probably don't appreciate is the aftermarket servicing part of your model. So it's not just having something connected for the purposes of tracking deliveries and anti-theft features, but you guys are maintaining these vehicles. If somebody hits a pothole, if something breaks on the bike, you guys are on the hook.
Yeah. And so I think, for us, a huge part of what we do is maintenance, and we're not just a bike company, where we're servicing the vehicles, and that's part of our subscription is, you expect an all-in service. And so for us, being able to use the data on these bikes, I think over time will become useful, even from a preventative maintenance perspective, where we will be able to see, in the same way that Progressive Insurance in the US, they see how you drive, and if you drive well, you're incentivized to drive well. I think we will be able to use the accelerometer data to at least have a feel for, are the brake pads, what state are the brake pads in? And I think you can apply all sorts of machine learning and AI to some of that data that'll be coming off the IoT device to allow us to promote the safety of our riders and our customers, and to get ahead of those sorts of issues. I think that and even it could be crash detection and all sorts of stuff that we could do live with this data in kind of a future world as the number of connected vehicles increases and the number of data and the amount of data increases.
Yeah, absolutely. I know some of our partners have been playing around with edge ML models that will detect things like crashes and sidewalk riding, in order to have that kind of intelligence built into the vehicle, and also to transmit that information to the cloud for maintenance purposes, understanding if people are going too fast, braking hard, going over rough terrain. I think another good example of how some of our product creators are building something purpose-built for a vehicle like yours, but also thinking about the future. It's not something that is built once, it's something that is evolving over time, as usage changes, as regulations change, as the industry responds. Mel, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, because you have dealt with probably literally hundreds of different fleet operators with unique needs and vehicles. How do you guys make sense of all of the diverse IoT devices that people might be using and evolving as those demands change?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, again, we're really spending a lot of time figuring out who's like the best e-bike maker or scooter partner, not only from the fact that that it connects to our platform at that rate of 99.9% and there's no issues, but also like, can they manufacture and deliver what they're saying? Like, can they actually do all the things that they've promised us? All that stuff is really important, because our clients are coming to us a lot of times and saying, I want to start a car sharing or micromobility or e-bike company. Who do you recommend for hardware? And so we have that kind of authority, if you will, to do that, but we do it in a way where we really make sure that whatever we're recommending, or it's like our partner in this space, like Particle, is someone who can deliver not only as a really good hardware, but also like long-term for the client. There's some hardware providers that will require you to buy 1,000 units up front, and then there's a 90 to 120 day lag time before delivery. Like, no one can operate that way, especially if you're starting out small and you're scaling. That's a huge fixed cost to have. So all these things are really important. And some of the things that Mina mentioned, like being able to do predictive maintenance, or getting better insights from your scooters, and security and location and all that kind of stuff, is really essential for our customers as well, because it's a huge operational cost for them if they can't optimize their fleet.
Absolutely. I really like seeing the work that you guys do with some of the fleet operators, where you are able to advise not just on the software side, but also on the hardware, and also on best practices for scaling in a sustainable way. I think you guys say hardware agnostic, but that's not to say you don't have opinions on what's the best fit for a given case.
Yes, I think that when we say hardware agnostic, is like we've seen some other operators where they only connect to Omni, or they only connect to OTA keys or whatever, and like that's just not good for anyone. That you have something that only connects to one. Or we've chosen not to make our own hardware because we are the masters of the software, and I think if you do too many things, you become the master of none. And so we are really becoming the expert and having really best-in-class software. And then we find the best-in-class partners for the other objects as well. So, we really spend a lot of time because we get a lot of people who ask us, what do you think about this scooter or that scooter or this hardware? And we have that kind of expertise and also the authority to say, no, we don't recommend that. And people listen, and it's because at the end of the day, like, you have to really think about your operations. And if your operations is having, issues with customer experience, the user experience is everything. If they go to the vehicle, whether it's an e-bike or a car, and they hit the app and they can't unlock and lock it, or it takes 45 seconds for it to unlock, they're not going to use it anymore. And
Absolutely.
That's the last thing as an operator you need to worry about is the technology. You have so many other things to think about as an operator that we want the technology to be the last thing you do. So everything with connectivity, which IoT is part of that, we consider and really recommend, because at the end of the day, like, someone's going to get blamed, right? If something doesn't work, they'll say it's the software, but then you're like, no, it's the hardware. And so it's just this song and dance. So anytime we can kind of avoid that, we always do.
Makes sense. And yeah, I think in the early days, it was such a patchwork of hardware and software solutions that people were using in the rush to get to market, but that created an incredible amount of complexity in the early days for a lot of the fleet operators. I think now a lot of the fleet operators that are being successful are realizing the value of simplicity and having, a vendor that does IoT and connectivity, and a vendor that does cloud, but also helps you with operations, and simplifying that stack so they can focus on where do they want to expand to next? How do they ensure that the customer experience is continuing to be of high quality in those new markets where they expand to? How do they pivot when needed to start delivering packages instead of people? I think it's such an important theme to reduce that complexity in what is already a very complex business.
Yeah, and also we've seen that we've done quite a few migrations from other platforms and other platform software providers, and if they have their own in-house or they have something that is not the best IoT, then they can't really take that with them, and then they have to pay all over again for like a better IoT or something that connects with our platform, not because we don't want to necessarily connect with that IoT, it's just because that IoT is not good. And you shouldn't be, you don't want to be scaling with that anyways. And so we've kind of taken that stance of, we don't want to play in this space. If you need to down the road create your own app or do something more customizable, you can take whatever IoT and go with it, and it's not locked to Wunder.
Makes sense.
So we think customer first in that way.
Makes sense. Mel, I want to stick with you for a second and talk a little bit about software for connected products. I think a lot of the folks in our audience today are starting on this journey, and they're deciding whether or not they want to partner with a firm like Wunder or another cloud backend, or build something themselves. Mm-hmm. What would you say to one of these prospects who is excited about our new Tracker SOM or Tracker One, and they say, "Oh, I can build the backend myself"?
I would say don't do it, just because of my own experience as an operator. Mina's laughing, but I'm saying don't do it ever. It's just, if you're starting out and you're doing it in the beginning, I say, outsource it to someone else. It's probably a lot cheaper than whatever you will have to build internally. And like at the end of the day, you're still trying to test out if this is something you want to do long-term or not. It should take you about 2 to 3 years to figure out if this is like a viable piece of business, whether you're an OEM or if you're somebody starting out on your own. When I was at Ford, we spent a lot of money on software that is no longer, millions of dollars, that's no longer, and it was never up to par with the market. So mm-hmm. if we created something that was like fixed routing, that this transit services like a bus, and then all of a sudden Uber comes out or Via comes out and it's dynamic routing where it can pick you up in your location, we're in trouble. And it was very expensive for us to try to get up to speed. And by the time we were trying to, it was too late. Like we had missed the mark on the market. Same with like, if you look at Maven, they spent $15 million on their app. It's no longer, and I don't even know how much they've spent more on that post development. car to go 50 million, like a lot of money for companies
Wow.
that are not in the business anymore. And it's okay. Sometimes these things happen, and it's better to test it out and see if it actually works or not. I know some OEMs have a mandate that they cannot actually build internally anymore. They have to outsource it. They have to see if this is actually something that they can do operationally and they can scale properly. It has too many fixed costs for them to do it, where you come in day zero and you have all these line items of fixed costs that you have to essentially try to get some revenue towards, which is going to be very difficult to do. So if you can minimize your software fees, and that team internally that's going to try to build as good versus our team that's all they do every day, it's going to be very difficult to compete. But not to say that down the road you might need to do that and you might need to create something, and you might say like, look, I want to create my own, but I want to use some of the components that you guys have and plug and play it. Like we do those things all the time as well.
I think that's such an important message, because a lot of our product creators are embarking on this IoT journey, and they're picking the pieces where they have skills, where they want to invest in building a team, and deciding where they want their core competencies to be. A lot of the times, whether you're building an asset tracking solution or an industrial equipment remote monitoring solution, the skills in-house tend to come from that side. You're good at building a hot tub or an elevator or a school bus or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's much more natural to work with the particle device and the particle team to build in that solution. The skills to build a cloud backend, unless you're willing to really invest in it, I think I would totally agree with everything you said, which is kind of leave it to the pros, because even when you see the results of folks like Ford, who have certainly skills in-house and certainly the budget, they're still, not fully satisfied with the results. So I would, the particle perspective would be maybe not, we're not saying don't do it, but don't do it unless you're really serious, that you have the skills in-house, that you're willing to invest, and that this is going to be long-term a core competency for your business.
Yeah, I mean, we've looked at some of our clients and their operational costs, and like the cost to software is like nominal compared to anything else. There's one client that is paying us not very much in software fees, but they're paying like 10 times in parking fees, which is crazy. Wow. Like the technology is how the service gets up and running. And so we always try to do the cost benefit analysis of those kinds of things too, when thinking about it.
That sounds great. We're almost out of time here, but I just wanted to say thank you to both of you for joining us. Really appreciate you guys taking the time to share your stories with our online audience. And I guess just to wrap things up, if anyone is interested in learning more about Bolt Bikes and their unique fleet of vehicles, they can find more information on getboltbikes.com. Or the same for Wunder Mobility at wundermobility.com. I think both of you folks are able to stick around for a little bit on our Discord channel to answer some questions. So once again, thank you both so much for joining today. And with that, I will pass it back to Michael Gleason to continue on with the day's activities.
Thanks for having us.